Question number 1. Scenario. A financial services company is migrating several SQL Server databases from its data center to Azure. The security architecture must retain SQL-compatible relational functionality, support masking of sensitive column values for non-privileged users, and eliminate operating system and database engine patching by the company. Cost and administrative effort must be minimized. Which Azure data service should the Cybersecurity Architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A. Azure Synapse Analytics Dedicated SQL Pool. Option B. SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machines. Option C. Azure SQL Database. The correct answer is Option C. Azure SQL Database. Here's why. Azure SQL Database is a fully managed relational PaaS service. Microsoft manages the underlying operating system and database engine maintenance, and the service supports dynamic data masking without requiring the organization to operate SQL Server virtual machines. Why are the other options not correct? A. A dedicated SQL pool is designed primarily for analytical data warehousing and is not the lowest cost replacement for ordinary operational SQL Server databases. B. SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machines leaves the customer responsible for significantly more operating system and database administration. Exam tip. Choose Azure SQL Database when the design requires SQL compatibility, PaaS management, built-in data security controls, and minimal administration. Question number 2. Scenario. An insurance company is replacing network location-based trust with a zero-trust access architecture for Microsoft 365. Access decisions must consider both the condition of the endpoint and the context of each authentication attempt. Which two controls should the architect recommend? Select two answers. The available options are as follows. Option A. Permit all sign-ins originating from the corporate network. Option B. Block access from devices that do not satisfy compliance requirements. Option C. Disable passwordless authentication for privileged users. Option D. Block sign-ins originating from locations that are not approved by policy. The correct answers are Option B. Block access from devices that do not satisfy compliance requirements, and Option D. Block sign-ins originating from locations that are not approved by policy. Here's why. The controls evaluate device health and sign-in context instead of assuming that a corporate network location is trustworthy. They support the zero-trust principle of verifying each access request explicitly. Why are the other options not correct? A. Automatically trusting the corporate network conflicts with zero trust and creates implicit location-based trust. C. Disabling passwordless authentication weakens rather than strengthens modern authentication, particularly when phishing-resistant methods are available. Exam tip. Zero-trust access decisions should evaluate identity, device condition, risk, application, and contextual signals rather than trust network location alone. Question number 3. Scenario. A public sector organization operates workloads across several Azure subscriptions. Its governance team requires continuous assessment of Azure resource configurations against the NIST cybersecurity framework and wants security recommendations for detected gaps. Which Microsoft service should the Cybersecurity Architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A. Microsoft Sentinel. Option B. Microsoft Purview Compliance Manager. Option C. Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Option D. Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. The correct answer is Option C. Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Here's why. Microsoft Defender for Cloud assesses Azure resource configurations against supported regulatory standards and security frameworks, presents compliance status, and provides recommendations for correcting resource-level gaps. Why are the other options not correct? A. Microsoft Sentinel is a SIEM and SOAR platform for security analytics, investigations, and automation. B. Compliance Manager primarily assesses organizational compliance activities and Microsoft 365-related controls rather than enforcing Azure resource posture. D. Defender for Cloud Apps focuses on cloud app discovery, governance, and session controls. Exam tip. Use Defender for Cloud regulatory compliance for cloud resource posture assessment. Use purview capabilities for broader data and compliance workflows. Question number 4. Scenario. A legal services company permits employees to access SharePoint online from personally owned computers. Users on unmanaged devices must be able to view documents in a browser, but downloading those documents must be blocked through an enforced session control. Which 2 services should the architect include in the design? Select 2 answers. The available options are as follows. Option A, Microsoft Purview Information Protection. Option B, Microsoft Intra-Application Proxy. Option C, Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. Option D, Microsoft Intra-Conditional Access. Option E, Azure Data Catalog. The correct answers are Option C, Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps, and Option D, Microsoft Intra-Conditional Access. Here's why. Conditional access identifies sessions from unmanaged devices and routes eligible application sessions through Defender for Cloud Apps. Defender for Cloud Apps then applies session controls that can block SharePoint online downloads while preserving browser access. Why are the other options not correct? A. Information protection can classify and protect content, but does not by itself provide the required real-time unmanaged device session control. B. Application proxy publishes private applications and is not the control for SharePoint online sessions. E. Azure Data Catalog is not an access enforcement service. Exam tip. For conditional, real-time controls inside SaaS sessions, combine conditional access with Defender for Cloud App Session Controls. Question number 5. Scenario. A software company is redesigning its Azure delivery lifecycle according to Cloud Adoption Framework DevSecOps guidance. The security team must place each activity at the stage where it provides the greatest value. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate CI/CD stage. Statement 1. Testing a running application for exploitable behavior by using DSD should occur during the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are commit the code, build and test, go to production, or operate. Statement 2. Identifying architectural threats and required mitigations should occur during the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are operate, plan and develop, commit the code, or build and test. Statement 3. Converting production security telemetry into threat intelligence and improvement actions should occur during the blank. The choices for Statement 3 are go to production, build and test, operate, or plan and develop. For Statement 1, the correct selection is build and test. DSD requires an executable or deployed application and is therefore performed during build and testing. For Statement 2, the correct selection is plan and develop. Threat modeling influences architecture and development decisions before implementation is finalized. For Statement 3, the correct selection is operate. Operational monitoring produces intelligence that supports response and future development improvements. Exam tip. Plan threats early, test executable software before release, and use production intelligence to continuously improve the lifecycle. Question number 6. Scenario. An engineering organization uses Azure repos and Azure pipelines to deploy regulated applications. The security architect must protect the source control workflow and prevent deployment secrets from being stored in repository or pipeline files. Complete each recommendation by selecting the most appropriate control. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Store and retrieve deployment passwords, certificates, and secrets by using the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are resource locks in Azure, Azure Key Vault, custom roles for build agents, or protected branches. Statement 2. Require reviewed pull requests and prevent direct changes to the production branch by using the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are custom roles for build agents, protected branches, resource locks in Azure, or Azure Key Vault. For Statement 1, the correct selection is Azure Key Vault. Key Vault prevents deployment credentials from being embedded directly in repositories or pipeline definitions. For Statement 2, the correct selection is protected branches. Branch protection enforces governance controls before changes can be merged. Exam tip. Use Key Vault for secret custody and branch protection for source control governance. These controls address different CI/CD risks. Question number 7. Scenario: a manufacturing company is establishing a common cloud control model for endpoints, databases, files, and storage services. The model must define consistent minimum security requirements for different Azure resource types and support measurable governance across subscriptions. Which capability should the cybersecurity architect use as the foundation of the control model? The available options are as follows. Option A: network isolation. Option B: security baselines in the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark. Option C: business resilience planning. Option D: modern access control. The correct answer is option B: security baselines in the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark. Here's why. Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark baselines define recommended controls for securing Azure services and workloads across areas such as identity, network, data, endpoint, logging, and posture management. Why are the other options not correct? A. Network isolation is one control area and does not provide a complete service-level baseline. C. Business resilience focuses on continuity and recovery rather than the full set of cloud security controls. D. Modern access control addresses identity and authorization, but not all resource protection domains. Exam tip: use MCSB to establish broad cloud security requirements. Use service-specific baselines to apply those requirements to individual resource types. Question number 8. Scenario: Microsoft Defender for Endpoint confirms ransomware execution on several engineering workstations. The response team must immediately contain lateral movement while retaining communication with Defender for Endpoint for investigation and remediation. Which post-breach response action should the architect specify? The available options are as follows. Option A: enable controlled folder access. Option B: isolate the affected devices from the network. Option C: run scheduled memory scans only. Option D: isolate only the associated user accounts. Option E: apply application isolation. The correct answer is option B: isolate the affected devices from the network. Here's why. Device isolation contains a compromised endpoint by restricting its network communications while maintaining the Defender for Endpoint channel needed for investigation and response. Why are the other options not correct? A. Controlled folder access is a preventive attack surface reduction control, not the primary post-breach containment action. C. Memory scanning may support investigation, but does not immediately restrict lateral movement. D. Isolating only user identities does not contain malware operating through the compromised device. E. Application isolation does not provide the same device-wide containment. Exam tip: after endpoint compromise is confirmed, isolate the device to contain lateral movement while preserving security service connectivity. Question number 9. Scenario: a global organization uses Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, and Microsoft Teams. The identity architecture must reevaluate active access in near real time after critical events such as account disablement, password reset, refresh token revocation, or changes to multi-factor authentication registration. Which two capabilities should the architect combine? Select two answers. The available options are as follows. Option A: Microsoft Intra-Privileged Identity Management. Option B: Microsoft Intra-Conditional Access. Option C: Assign and Risk Policy. Option D: Continuous Access Evaluation. Option E: Microsoft Intra-Application Proxy. The correct answers are Option B: Microsoft Intra-Conditional Access, and Option D: Continuous Access Evaluation. Here's why. Conditional access defines the access requirements, while continuous access evaluation enables supported applications to react rapidly to critical identity events and reevaluate active sessions without waiting for ordinary token expiration. Why are the other options not correct? APIM manages privileged role activation and does not reevaluate ordinary Microsoft 365 sessions. C. Assign and Risk Policy responds to detected authentication risk, but does not cover all listed critical events. E. Application Proxy provides remote access to private applications and is not the Microsoft 365 session reevaluation mechanism. Exam tip: conditional access specifies the policy, Continuous access evaluation enables supported services to enforce critical event changes in near real time. Question number 10. Scenario. A healthcare provider protects on-premises Windows servers by using the Microsoft Azure Recovery Services Agent and an Azure Recovery Services Vault. The ransomware resilience design must preserve recoverability after malicious backup deletion and add centralized verification before sensitive agent operations. Complete each recommendation by selecting the appropriate Azure backup protection. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. To keep recovery points recoverable after an administrator deletes backup data, enable the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are multi-user authorization using Resource Guard, soft delete for backups, customer-managed key encryption, or Azure Resource Locks. Statement 2. To require a short-lived Azure-generated verification value before critical MARS protection changes, use the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are customer-managed key encryption, a security pin for critical operations, soft delete for backups, or Azure Resource Locks. For Statement 1, the correct selection is soft delete for backups. Soft delete preserves deleted recovery data so it can be restored after accidental or malicious deletion. For Statement 2, the correct selection is a security pin for critical operations. The security pin provides centralized verification for protected MARS operations. Exam tip. Soft delete supports recovery after deletion. Security pins and multi-user authorization add protection around critical backup operations. Question number 11. Scenario. A SaaS provider is beginning an enterprise ransomware resilience initiative. Executives need to know which business services must be restored first, who owns recovery decisions, and how restoration will be performed and tested before individual controls are selected. What should the cybersecurity architect recommend doing first? The available options are as follows. Option A. Implement data protection controls. Option B. Prepare and validate a recovery plan. Option C. Develop a privileged identity strategy. Option D. Develop a privileged access strategy. The correct answer is Option B. Prepare and validate a recovery plan. Here's why. A recovery plan establishes critical service priorities, responsibilities, dependencies, restoration procedures, and testing requirements. Those decisions must guide the subsequent selection of data protection and privileged access controls. Why are the other options not correct? A. Data protection should be implemented according to business recovery priorities established by the plan. C. Privileged identity protection is important, but addresses only one ransomware risk area. D. A privileged access strategy is also essential, but does not replace an end-to-end recovery plan. Exam tip. Begin ransomware recovery architecture by defining and testing how critical operations will be restored, then design controls around that plan. Question number 12. Scenario. A development organization uses Azure pipelines to deliver an internet-facing application. Its secure development lifecycle requires dynamic testing that interacts with the deployed application and identifies vulnerabilities that are visible only while the application is running. Which activity should the architect include in the DSD stage? The available options are as follows. Option A. Threat modeling. Option B. Software dependency analysis. Option C. Unit testing. Option D. Authorized penetration testing. The correct answer is Option D. Authorized penetration testing. Here's why. DSD evaluates an application from the outside while it is running. Authorized automated or manual penetration testing can exercise runtime interfaces and identify exploitable behavior that static or component-level tests may not detect. Why are the other options not correct? A. Threat modeling is a design stage activity. B. Dependency analysis examines third-party components and is generally a software composition analysis activity. C. Unit testing validates individual code units rather than dynamically attacking a running application. Exam tip. DSD tests observable runtime behavior. SCSD examines source or compiled code, and dependency scanning evaluates third-party components. Question number 13. Scenario. During a ransomware incident, a company may disable identity federation, revoke sessions, and apply restrictive conditional access policies. Administrators must still retain a tightly controlled method of accessing the Microsoft intratenant if normal administrative identities become unusable. Which capability should the cybersecurity architect include? The available options are as follows. Option A, device compliance policies. Option B, emergency access accounts. Option C, customer lockbox for Microsoft Azure. Option D, secure administrative workstations. The correct answer is option B, emergency access accounts. Here's why. Emergency access accounts provide a separately protected method of tenant administration when normal identity systems, federation, authentication methods, or access policies fail or cause administrative lockout. Why are the other options not correct? A. Device compliance policies can restrict access but do not provide a lockout recovery path. C. Customer lockbox governs Microsoft support access to customer data. D. Secure administrative workstations reduce privileged access risk but cannot restore access when all normal administrator accounts are blocked. Exam tip. Maintain tightly monitored emergency accounts that are independent of normal authentication dependencies and excluded only from policies that could cause total lockout. Question number 14. Scenario. A research organization permits new Azure resources to be deployed only in the Central India and South India regions. Deployments to all other regions must be denied consistently across the applicable subscriptions. Which governance capability should the architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A, regulatory compliance standards in Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Option B, Azure policy assignments using an allowed locations policy. Option C, custom Azure roles. Option D, Azure management groups without policy assignments. The correct answer is option B, Azure policy assignments using an allowed locations policy. Here's why. Azure policy can evaluate the deployment region and deny resource creation outside an approved list when the policy is assigned at the required management group or subscription scope. Why are the other options not correct? A. Defender for Cloud regulatory standards assess posture but are not the direct deployment enforcement mechanism. C. Azure roles govern who can perform actions, not which regions a resource may use. D. Management groups organize scopes but do not enforce location requirements without an assigned policy. Exam tip. Use Azure policy for enforceable resource configuration requirements and assign it at the highest appropriate governance scope. Question number 15. Scenario. A company protects its on-premises workloads by using Microsoft Azure Backup Server and a recovery services vault. The ransomware architecture must prevent a compromised backup administrator from independently authorizing destructive operations against protected recovery data. Which control should the architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A. Activate the backup contributor role through Microsoft Entra PIM. Option B. Register Microsoft Azure Backup Server with another recovery services vault. Option C. Generate a security PIN for routine backup administration. Option D. Configure multi-user authorization by using Azure Resource Guard. The correct answer is option D. Configure multi-user authorization by using Azure Resource Guard. Here's why. Multi-user authorization protects designated Azure backup operations by requiring approval through Resource Guard, which can be controlled by a separate administrator or security boundary. A compromised backup administrator, therefore, cannot complete protected destructive operations alone. Why are the other options not correct? A PIM can make a role eligible or time-bound, but does not provide independent approval through Resource Guard for protected backup operations. B. Registering MAVs with a vault establishes protection, but does not prevent a compromised administrator from performing destructive actions. C. A security PIN adds verification for supported operations, but does not provide the same separation of duties as multi-user authorization. Exam tip. Use Resource Guard multi-user authorization when backup operations require independent approval and separation of duties. Question number 16. Scenario. An enterprise is creating a platform subscription for shared connectivity and 4 application subscriptions. The target architecture requires standardized deployment of hub networking, Azure Firewall, Azure Bastion, Azure Key Vault, and network security groups while minimizing custom implementation effort. Which deployment approach should the cybersecurity architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A, Azure Advisor. Option B, Azure Well-Architected Framework Assessments. Option C, an Azure Landing Zone Accelerator. Option D, Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark Documentation only. The correct answer is option C, an Azure Landing Zone Accelerator. Here's why. An Azure Landing Zone Accelerator provides an implementation approach for deploying a governed, scalable platform foundation with management hierarchy, connectivity, identity, policy, and shared security services. It reduces the effort required to build the platform architecture manually. Why are the other options not correct? A. Azure Advisor provides recommendations for existing resources, but is not a platform deployment framework. B. The well-architected framework guides workload assessment and design, but does not deploy the required multi-subscription platform. D. MCSB defines security controls and recommendations, but is not an automated landing zone deployment solution. Exam tip. Use landing zone accelerators to implement an enterprise Azure platform. Use CAF, WAF, and MCSB guidance to shape governance and security requirements. Question number 17. Scenario. A company deploys production applications from the main branch of an Azure Repos repository. The security architecture requires every change to be submitted through a pull request, reviewed, and validated before it can be merged and deployed. Which control should the architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A, Azure Policy. Option B, Custom Azure Roles. Option C, Custom Roles and Azure Pipelines. Option D, Azure Repos Branch Policies. The correct answer is option D, Azure Repos Branch Policies. Here's why. Branch policies can require pull requests, reviewer approval, build validation, and other checks before changes are merged into a protected Azure Repos branch. Why are the other options not correct? A. Azure Policy governs Azure resource configurations rather than repository merge behavior. B. Custom Azure roles control Azure resource permissions and do not enforce pull requests. C. Pipeline roles govern pipeline access but do not prevent direct commits or unreviewed merges to a repository branch. Exam tip. Use repository branch policies for code review and merge governance. Use pipeline controls for build and deployment authorization. Question number 18. Scenario. A media company is strengthening its recovery architecture against ransomware and malicious administrators. Both Azure Backup Recovery Points and business-critical blobs must use write once, read many protection that prevents alteration or early deletion during the required retention period. Complete each recommendation by selecting the strongest applicable protection. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. For vaulted Azure Backup Recovery Points, configure the blank so destructive operations are blocked until retention expires. The choices for Statement 1 are a locked immutable vault, a security pin, platform-managed encryption, or an access tier. Statement 2. For Azure Blob Data, configure the blank so objects cannot be modified or deleted during the retention period. The choices for Statement 2 are time-based immutable blob storage, platform-managed encryption, a lifecycle access tier, or a shared access signature policy. For Statement 1, the correct selection is a locked immutable vault. Locked vault immutability protects backup recovery points against malicious or accidental destructive operations. For Statement 2, the correct selection is time-based immutable blob storage. Time-based immutability enforces worm retention directly on protected blob data. Exam tip. Encryption protects confidentiality. Immutability protects retained data from modification and deletion, including actions by compromised administrators. Question number 19. Scenario. A security operations center receives a high volume of repetitive endpoint, identity, email, and collaboration alerts. Tier 1 analysts spend excessive time investigating common alerts and performing standard remediation actions. Which capability should the cybersecurity architect prioritize to reduce the analyst's operational workload? The available options are as follows. Option A. Create additional advanced hunting queries. Option B. Enable automated investigation and response in Microsoft Defender XDR. Option C. Automate enterprise data classification. Option D. Enable built-in compliance initiatives in Azure Policy. The correct answer is Option B. Enable automated investigation and response in Microsoft Defender XDR. Here's why. Automated investigation and response can investigate common alerts, correlate evidence, and perform or recommend remediation actions, reducing repetitive work for Tier 1 analysts. Why are the other options not correct? A. Additional hunting queries support proactive investigation, but usually increase analyst-driven work. C. Data classification supports information governance and does not automate security incident investigation. D. Azure policy compliance initiatives assess resource configuration and do not remediate Defender XDR incidents. Exam tip. Use automated investigation and response for repeatable alert investigation and remediation. Reserve analyst effort for complex or high-impact incidents. Question number 20. Scenario. A company wants to reduce the likelihood that ransomware or another untrusted process can encrypt documents stored in protected local user folders on Windows endpoints. Which endpoint protection should the Cybersecurity Architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A. BitLocker Drive Encryption. Option B. Azure Files. Option C. Controlled Folder Access. Option D. Windows Defender Application Control. Option E. Microsoft Defender for Endpoint Onboarding Alone. The correct answer is Option C. Controlled Folder Access. Here's why. Controlled folder access prevents untrusted applications from modifying protected folders, reducing the ability of ransomware to encrypt local user files. Why are the other options not correct? A. BitLocker protects data at rest when a device or drive is lost, but an authenticated ransomware process can still encrypt accessible files. B. Moving data to Azure Files does not itself prevent ransomware from modifying accessible files. D. Application control can restrict executable code, but is not the direct protected folder capability described. E. Defender for Endpoint Onboarding supplies detection and response capabilities, but onboarding alone does not configure protected folder enforcement. Exam tip. Use controlled folder access to protect designated folders from unauthorized application changes. Do not confuse ransomware write protection with disk encryption. Question number 21. Scenario. A retail company uses Azure pipelines to deploy applications into several Azure subscriptions. The security architecture must eliminate stored passwords and client secrets from service connections, avoid dependence on employee accounts, and minimize credential rotation effort. Which identity should the Cybersecurity Architect recommend for the Azure DevOps Service Connection? The available options are as follows. Option A. A group-managed service account from the on-premises domain. Option B. A Microsoft Entra user whose password is stored in Azure Key Vault. Option C. An Azure Managed Identity configured for Workload Identity Federation. Option D. A Microsoft Entra user with an eligible role assignment in Privileged Identity Management. The correct answer is Option C. An Azure Managed Identity configured for Workload Identity Federation. Here's why. A managed identity with Workload Identity Federation allows Azure DevOps to obtain tokens without storing a client secret or using an employee account. It removes secret expiration and credential rotation risks from the service connection. Why are the other options not correct? A. A GMSA is an ADDS identity and is not the preferred credential for an Azure Resource Manager service connection. B. Storing a user password in Key Vault still creates a long-lived human credential and rotation dependency. DPIM protects privileged human role activation, but does not make a user account an appropriate pipeline identity. Exam tip. Use federated workload identities or managed identities for automation instead of passwords, client secrets, or human accounts. Question number 22. Scenario. A security operations team uses Microsoft Sentinel to analyze Microsoft 365 and Microsoft Defender XDR events. The team must import indicators of compromise from an external threat intelligence provider and automatically open incidents when event data matches the IP address of a known command and control server. Complete each recommendation by selecting the appropriate Microsoft Sentinel capability. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. To create incidents when security events match a known command and control IP address, configure the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are an analytics rule, a playbook, a threat indicator, or custom entity activities. Statement 2. To import known malware indicators from the external provider, configure the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are a playbook, a threat intelligence data connector, an analytics rule, or custom entity activities. For Statement 1, the correct selection is an analytics rule. An analytics rule performs the detection logic and can create an incident when matching events are found. For Statement 2, the correct selection is a threat intelligence data connector. The connector ingests threat indicators supplied by the third-party intelligence platform. Exam tip. Connectors ingest intelligence or telemetry. Analytics rules evaluate the data and generate alerts or incidents. Question number 23. Scenario. A healthcare organization hosts 2 internal web applications on Windows servers. Remote employees currently establish a VPN connection before accessing the applications. The organization wants to remove direct inbound exposure, apply Microsoft Entra pre-authentication, and provide application-specific access rather than broad network access. Which capability should the Cybersecurity Architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A, Microsoft Defender for Cloud App Session Controls. Option B, Microsoft Entra Application Proxy. Option C, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint Web Protection. Option D, a VPN service that authenticates users through Microsoft Entra ID. The correct answer is Option B, Microsoft Entra Application Proxy. Here's why. Application Proxy publishes an on-premises web application through outbound connectors and can apply Microsoft Entra pre-authentication and conditional access without exposing an inbound application endpoint or granting broad VPN access. Why are the other options not correct? A. Defender for Cloud Apps governs SaaS usage and sessions, but does not publish the internal web applications. C. Endpoint Web Protection protects client browsing and does not provide application publishing. D. Changing VPN authentication improves identity verification but retains broad network-level access and the VPN attack surface. Exam tip. Use Application Proxy for identity-aware access to individual on-premises web applications without inbound firewall publishing. Question number 24. Scenario. A consulting company subscribes to a third-party SaaS application that supports SAML-based authentication with Microsoft Entra ID. Employees must use their organizational identities, and administrators must centrally control user assignments and single sign-on. What should the architect configure in the Microsoft Entra tenant? The available options are as follows. Option A, a Microsoft Entra Application Proxy application. Option B, a Microsoft Entra External ID Customer Tenant. Option C, an ADFS Relying Party Trust. Option D, a Microsoft Entra Enterprise application. The correct answer is Option D, a Microsoft Entra Enterprise application. Here's why. An enterprise application represents the SaaS service in the tenant and enables administrators to configure single sign-on, assign users or groups, and govern access with Microsoft Entra policies. Why are the other options not correct? A. Application Proxy is primarily for publishing private web applications. B. An external ID customer tenant supports customer identity scenarios rather than workforce access to an enterprise SaaS application. C. An ADFS trust is unnecessary when the SaaS provider supports direct Microsoft Entra integration. Exam tip. For Workforce SSO to a third-party SaaS application, configure its enterprise application in Microsoft Entra ID. Question number 25. Scenario. An organization stores business documents in SharePoint Online and OneDrive. Its ransomware recovery strategy must use native Microsoft 365 capabilities with minimal administration. Complete each recovery recommendation. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. To recover a document after ransomware encrypts and saves changes directly into the existing file, use the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are data loss prevention policies, versioning, or the recycle bin. Statement 2. To recover documents after ransomware creates encrypted replacements and deletes the original files, use the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are versioning, the recycle bin, or data loss prevention policies. For Statement 1, the correct selection is versioning. Previous versions remain available for restoration after in-place modification. For Statement 2, the correct selection is the recycle bin. Deleted original documents can be recovered from the recycle bin. Exam tip: use version history for overwritten content and the recycle bin for deleted content. Question number 26. Scenario: a pharmaceutical company must govern all new resources in an Azure subscription according to ISO 27001 controls. Resource configurations must be evaluated automatically, and non-compliant resources must be identified through centrally assigned governance rules. Which Azure capability should the Cybersecurity Architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A, Azure policy with the applicable regulatory compliance initiative. Option B, the Microsoft Defender for Cloud Regulatory Compliance dashboard alone. Option C, Azure role-based access control. Option D, Azure deployment stacks. The correct answer is Option A, Azure policy with the applicable regulatory compliance initiative. Here's why. Azure policy provides built-in regulatory compliance initiatives mapped to standards such as ISO 27001. Assignments continuously evaluate resources and identify configurations that do not comply with the initiative. Why are the other options not correct? B. The Defender for Cloud dashboard displays assessment results, but is not the underlying governance mechanism that defines and assigns the controls. C. Azure RBAC controls who can perform actions and does not evaluate resource configuration against ISO requirements. D. Deployment stacks manage groups of resources and do not provide regulatory compliance assessment. Exam tip: use Azure policy initiatives to translate regulatory requirements into accessible or enforceable resource controls. Question number 27. Scenario: a cloud-only enterprise is designing an integrated Microsoft Defender XDR architecture. The design must connect Microsoft data protection capabilities and identity threat detection to unified security operations. Complete each architectural recommendation. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. For centralized data loss prevention policy capabilities and DLP alert integration, include the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are Azure Data Explorer, Microsoft Purview, or Azure Data Catalog. Statement 2. For behavioral detection of identity threats involving users and Active Directory entities, include the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are Microsoft Intra Verified ID, Microsoft Defender for Identity, or Microsoft Intra ID Protection. For Statement 1, the correct selection is Microsoft Purview. Purview provides the information protection and DLP control plane. For Statement 2, the correct selection is Microsoft Defender for Identity. Defender for Identity detects suspicious identity and directory behavior and integrates its alerts with Defender XDR. Exam tip: use Purview for data governance and DLP. Use Defender for identity-focused threat detection. Question number 28. Scenario: a company uses Exchange Online and has detected phishing messages that impersonate employees and executive email addresses. The messaging security architecture must identify and block this form of sender impersonation. Complete the recommended design. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Use the blank as the protection service. The choices for Statement 1 are Microsoft Purview, Microsoft Defender for Office 365, Microsoft Intra ID Protection, or Microsoft Defender for DNS. Statement 2. Configure the blank to protect the impersonated users and domains. The choices for Statement 2 are an anti-spam policy, an anti-phishing policy, a data loss prevention policy, or an insider risk policy. For Statement 1, the correct selection is Microsoft Defender for Office 365. Defender for Office 365 supplies impersonation and phishing protection for Exchange Online. For Statement 2, the correct selection is an anti-phishing policy. Anti-phishing policies contain the impersonation protection settings. Exam tip: use anti-phishing policies for spoofing and impersonation. Use anti-spam policies mainly for bulk and spam filtering. Question number 29. Scenario: an engineering company maintains a separate project group for each client engagement. Group membership grants access to a SharePoint online workspace and an on-premises Windows file share. Project owners must periodically confirm membership, and unconfirmed users must be removed automatically. The same group membership must govern both cloud and on-premises resources. Complete the identity governance design. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. To obtain recurring project owner certification and automatically remove access when membership is not approved, use the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are entitlement management, access reviews, privileged identity management, or lifecycle workflows. Statement 2. To govern membership in Microsoft Entra ID while making the groups available to the on-premises domain, the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are use the existing groups synchronized from ADDS without modification, create cloud security groups without on-premises provisioning, or create cloud security groups and provision them to ADDS. For Statement 1, the correct selection is access reviews. Access reviews periodically ask designated reviewers to confirm membership and can apply removal decisions automatically. For Statement 2, the correct selection is create cloud security groups and provision them to ADDS. Provisioning the cloud-managed groups to ADDS makes the governed membership available to on-premises resources. Exam tip: use access reviews for recurring recertification. Use group provisioning when one cloud-governed membership must authorize on-premises resources. Question number 30. Scenario: a healthcare payment provider stores billing records in an Azure SQL database named PaymentsDB. The database contains sensitive payment card numbers and patient email addresses. Database administrators require broad permissions to maintain and troubleshoot the database, but they must not be able to decrypt the payment card numbers. The administrators will not be granted access to the cryptographic keys used by the client application. Support representatives access the records through a customer assistance portal. To reduce data exposure, the portal must display patient email addresses in a format that hides the full address from non-privileged support representatives. Complete each security architecture recommendation by selecting the appropriate Azure SQL capability. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Prevent the database engine and database administrators without access to the client-side cryptographic keys from viewing plaintext payment card numbers by implementing the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are 1. Dynamic data masking, transparent data encryption, always encrypted, or row-level security. Statement 2. Return masked patient email addresses to non-privileged support representatives by implementing the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are 2. Row-level security, always encrypted, dynamic data masking, or transparent data encryption. For Statement 1, the correct selection is always encrypted. Always encrypted protects selected columns so the database engine cannot decrypt them without access to the client-side keys. For Statement 2, the correct selection is dynamic data masking. Dynamic data masking obfuscates sensitive data in query results for non-privileged users without changing the stored data. Exam tip: use always encrypted to protect plaintext from administrators, dynamic data masking to limit displayed values, and TD for data at rest. Question number 31. Scenario: a company uses a partner-hosted SaaS application integrated with Microsoft Entra ID. Employees must be able to request application access through a self-service workflow, provide a business justification, and have their continued access certified by their managers every quarter. Which capability should the Cybersecurity Architect include in the design? The available options are as follows. Option A, Microsoft Intra-Application Proxy. Option B, Connected Apps in Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. Option C, Microsoft Intra-ID Governance. Option D, Access Policies in Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. The correct answer is Option C, Microsoft Intra-ID Governance. Here's why. Microsoft Intra-ID Governance includes entitlement management for self-service access packages, request questions, approvals, and expiration, together with access reviews for recurring manager recertification. Why are the other options not correct? A. Application Proxy publishes private applications, but does not provide access package lifecycle governance. B. Connected apps provide visibility and governance for cloud applications, not self-service entitlement workflows. D. Defender for Cloud Apps access policies control sessions or application access conditions, but do not provide quarterly entitlement reviews. Exam tip. Use entitlement management for request and approval workflows and access reviews to verify that granted access remains necessary. Question number 32. Scenario. A company operates Linux node pools in Azure Kubernetes service. Operating system security updates are applied automatically where supported. The architecture must ensure that kernel fixes that cannot become active dynamically are completed with minimal ongoing administration. Which requirement should the architect include? The available options are as follows. Option A. Upgrade the Kubernetes control plane version whenever a Linux kernel update is released. Option B. Restart affected nodes after updates that require a reboot. Option C. Wait until every update is incorporated into the node image before applying any security fixes. The correct answer is Option B. Restart affected nodes after updates that require a reboot. Here's why. AKS Linux nodes can receive operating system security updates, but certain kernel and system updates require a node restart before the updated components become active. The lifecycle design must therefore include reboot handling. Why are the other options not correct? A. A Kubernetes version upgrade is not required for every operating system kernel patch. C. Waiting for a future provisioning image delays available security updates and is not required for all patches. Exam tip. Differentiate Kubernetes version upgrades, node image upgrades, package updates, and reboots. They solve different maintenance requirements. Question number 33. Scenario. A company has several on-premises network appliances that emit common event format messages. Microsoft Sentinel has no product-specific connector for the appliances. The messages must be collected and forwarded to the Sentinel workspace through a supported architecture. Which component should the Cybersecurity Architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A. An Azure Logic Apps workflow. Option B. An on-premises data gateway. Option C. An Azure Data Factory pipeline. Option D. A Linux syslog and CEF log forwarder running Azure Monitor Agent. The correct answer is Option D. A Linux syslog and CEF log forwarder running Azure Monitor Agent. Here's why. CEF producing appliances can send events to a Linux log forwarder. Its syslog daemon receives the messages, and Azure Monitor Agent forwards them to the Microsoft Sentinel workspace. Why are the other options not correct? A. A Logic Apps workflow is used for orchestration and automation, not as the standard CEF ingestion path. B. An on-premises data gateway connects supported data services to Microsoft Cloud Services, but is not a CEF collector. C. Data Factory performs data integration and transformation rather than security appliance log forwarding. Exam tip. For unsupported appliances that produce CEF or syslog, use a Linux log forwarder with Azure Monitor Agent. Question number 34. Scenario. An Azure DevOps pipeline creates Azure App Service applications and corresponding name records at a third-party DNS provider. The security architecture must prevent a name record from remaining after its target application is deleted. Cleanup must be automatic and require minimal operational intervention. Which lifecycle control should the cybersecurity architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A. Rely on Microsoft Defender for App Service to delete dangling DNS records. Option B. Add only an app service domain verification TXT record for each hostname. Option C. Manage the application and DNS record through one deployment workflow that removes the name before deleting the application. Option D. Use Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps to discover each deployed application. The correct answer is Option C. Manage the application and DNS record through one deployment workflow that removes the name before deleting the application. Here's why. A DNS record hosted by a third party has an independent lifecycle from the app service resource. Managing both through one deployment workflow allows the DNS provider API to remove the name before the application target is deleted, preventing a dangling record. Why are the other options not correct? A. Defender can identify relevant security risks but cannot delete a record maintained by an unrelated DNS provider. B. An Azure TXT record helps prevent another app service resource from claiming the hostname, but it does not remove the dangling name. D. Defender for Cloud Apps governs cloud app activity and does not manage authoritative DNS records. Exam tip. Treat external DNS records as application lifecycle dependencies. Remove the DNS pointer before deleting its cloud target and retain domain verification records as defense in depth. Question number 35. Scenario. An organization uses Microsoft Entra pass-through authentication for hybrid users. The identity architecture must reduce the effect of repeated password guessing attempts and allow Microsoft Entra risk detection to identify credentials exposed in public breach data. Map each identity capability to the requirement it directly addresses. One capability will not be used. The available source items are as follows. Source item 1. Microsoft Entra password protection. Source item 2. Password hash synchronization. Source item 3. Microsoft Entra smart lockout. The destination requirements are as follows. Destination A. Detect leaked credentials belonging to hybrid users. Destination B. Reduce the impact of brute force password attempts. The first correct mapping is password hash synchronization, mapped to detect leaked credentials belonging to hybrid users. The second correct mapping is Microsoft Entra Smart Lockout, mapped to reduce the impact of brute force password attempts. Here's why. Smart Lockout filters brute force attempts before they cause excessive on-premises account lockouts. Password hash synchronization gives Microsoft Entra ID the hash material required to compare hybrid credentials with newly discovered leaked credential pairs. Exam tip. Password protection blocks weak password choices. Smart Lockout responds to guessing attempts, and password hash synchronization enables leaked credential matching. Question number 36. Scenario. An enterprise operates Windows and Linux virtual machines in Azure. Its vulnerability management architecture must identify missing patches and insecure operating system configurations while continuing to use the organization's quality scanning technology. Which Microsoft security plan should the architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A. Microsoft Defender External Attack Surface Management. Option B. Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Option C. Microsoft Defender for Servers. Option D. Microsoft Defender Threat Intelligence. The correct answer is Option C, Microsoft Defender for Servers. Here's why. Defender for Servers provides server workload protection and vulnerability assessment integration for Azure and Azure Arc-enabled machines, including supported quality-space scanning configurations. Why are the other options not correct? A. Defender ESM discovers externally visible assets and exposures rather than scanning operating system configurations inside managed servers. B. Defender for Endpoint supplies endpoint detection, response, and vulnerability capabilities, but the stated Qualys integration is provided through the Defender for Servers architecture. D. Defender Threat Intelligence supplies threat actor and infrastructure intelligence, not host vulnerability assessment. Exam tip. Use Defender for Servers for cloud workload protection and server vulnerability management integration. Question number 37. Scenario. A security operations center is adopting a zero-trust operating model. The organization needs a staged modernization plan that first provides cross-workload awareness, then reduces repetitive analyst work, and finally expands preventive and detective coverage. Select the 3 relevant objectives and arrange them in the recommended deployment sequence. The available items are as follows. Item 1. Enable automated investigation and response. Item 2. Establish ransomware recovery readiness. Item 3. Add advanced protection and detection controls. Item 4. Establish cross-domain security visibility. Item 5. Implement disaster recovery. You have completed part 1 of the SC-100 practice series. Continue your preparation by opening the complete playlist and watching the remaining parts in sequence. Please like this video, subscribe to Tech with Kaushik, and enable notifications for more certification exam preparation content. Share your score, questions, or feedback in the comments. Thank you for watching. See you in the next part.